What happens when experienced medical professionals dismiss a young doctor as too inexperienced to handle a critical case? They had no idea they were questioning someone whose credentials would leave them speechless. Sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one everyone assumes is still learning. Sometimes the eighth story reveals that expertise isn't measured by age. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the pristine corridors of St. Catherine's Medical Center. Of the nation's most prestigious private hospitals, the early morning shift was just beginning. The usual symphony of beeping monitors, hushed conversations, and the soft squeaking of sneakers against polished linoleum floors. Among the sea of medical professionals hurrying through the halls was Dr. Maya Patel, whose youthful appearance and petite frame made her look more like a medical student than a practicing physician. At 24, Maya possessed an intellect that had propelled her through medical school at an unprecedented pace, but her baby face and diminutive stature often worked against her in the hierarchical world of hospital medicine. She wore her white coat with quiet pride, though it hung loosely on her small frame, and her stethoscope, a graduation gift from her parents, draped around her neck like a badge of hard-earned honor. The October morning was crisp and clear outside, but inside St. Catherine's, the climate-controlled environment maintained its steady 72 degrees. Maya made her way toward the cardiac intensive care unit, clutching her tablet and a steaming cup of coffee that she'd barely had time to sip. Her shift had started at 6 a.m. She was already running behind after spending extra time reviewing patient charts from the previous night. St. Catherine's Medical Center was the kind of institution that attracted the elite of the medical profession. Its reputation for cutting-edge treatment and research drew the most experienced doctors from around the world. The hospital's marble floors, mahogany-paneled conference rooms, and state-of-the-art equipment created an atmosphere of medical excellence that was both inspiring and intimidating. Maya had been working at St. Catherine's for 6 months as a resident in internal medicine, but she still felt the weight of proving herself every single day. The attending physicians, seasoned nurses, and even some of the other residents treated her with a mixture of patronizing kindness and barely concealed skepticism. Her young appearance made it difficult for many to take her seriously, despite her impressive academic credentials and sharp diagnostic skills. The cardiac unit was Maya's current rotation, and she had been assigned to work under Dr. Richard Thornton, a 62-year-old cardiologist with over 30 years of experience. Dr. Thornton was known throughout the hospital for his expertise, his demanding standards, and his particular disdain for what he called book-smart kids who think they know medicine. Maya had quickly learned to keep her observations to herself unless directly asked, though it often frustrated her when she spotted potential issues that others missed. As Maya approached the nurses' station, noticed the morning huddle was already in progress. The day shift nurses, led by charge nurse Patricia Williams, were receiving their patient assignments and updates from the night shift. Patricia, a formidable woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes, and the cardiac unit with military precision. She had been at St. Catherine's for over 20 years and commanded respect from even the most senior physicians. "Good morning, Dr. Patel," Patricia said with the tone she typically reserved for medical students. "Your patients are in beds 12 through 16. Mrs. Rodriguez in 12 is post-op day 2 from her bypass surgery. Mr. Chen in 13 came in overnight with chest pain," and she continued rattling off the assignments while Maya nodded and took notes on her tablet. Maya noticed that Patricia never quite made eye contact when speaking to her, instead looking slightly over her shoulder as if addressing someone more important. Standing behind her was a subtle form of dismissal that Maya had encountered countless times since starting her residency, but it still stung each time it happened. Dr. Thornton emerged from one of the patient rooms, his imposing 6-foot frame commanding attention as he strode toward the nurses' station. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his expensive shoes clicked authoritatively against the floor. Behind him followed Dr. James Mitchell, the chief cardiology resident, whose confident demeanor and athletic build made him look like he belonged in the pages of a medical journal. "Dr. Patel," Dr. Thornton said, glancing at Maya with the expression of someone who had just remembered an unpleasant obligation. I trust you reviewed the night's admissions. We have a busy morning ahead, and I don't have time for lengthy explanations of basic cardiac pathophysiology. Maya felt her cheeks flush slightly. Yes, Dr. Thornton. I've reviewed all the charts, and I'm ready for rounds. Dr. Mitchell smirked slightly, exchanging a glance with one of the nurses. Maya had grown accustomed to these small moments of condescension, the subtle ways in which her colleagues reinforced her position at the bottom of the medical hierarchy. She told herself it was just part of being a resident, that everyone went through this phase of proving themselves. But deep down, she wondered if her young appearance made it worse. The morning rounds began with Mrs. Rodriguez, a 67-year-old woman recovering from triple bypass surgery. Dr. Thornton explained her case to the assembled group of residents and medical students, pointing out the subtle signs of successful recovery while emphasizing the potential complications they needed to monitor. Maya listened intently, taking notes and asking herself the questions she wished she could voice aloud as they moved from patient to patient. Maya found herself growing increasingly frustrated with the pace and superficiality of the discussions. Dr. Thornton's years of experience were undeniable, but his approach felt routine, almost automated. He seemed to be going through the motions rather than truly engaging with each patient's unique presentation. When they reached Mr. Chun's room, Maya's attention sharpened. The 53-year-old businessman had been admitted overnight with chest pain, and his preliminary workup showed some concerning findings that weren't being adequately addressed. As Dr. Thornton discussed the standard protocol for chest pain evaluation, Maya studied Mr. Chen's chart more carefully on her tablet. Something wasn't right. The timeline of Mr. Chen's symptoms, combined with his lab values and EKG findings, painted a picture that didn't quite fit the working diagnosis of unstable angina that had been assigned by the emergency department. Maya noticed subtle abnormalities in his troponin levels and some unusual patterns in his cardiac enzymes that suggested a more complex underlying condition. Dr. Patel, Dr. Thornton's voice cut through her concentration. Since you seem so absorbed in that tablet, perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on Mr. Chun's case? Maya looked up to find all eyes on her. Dr. Thornton's expression was challenging, as if he was testing whether she had been paying attention. The other residents waited with barely concealed amusement, anticipating another moment where the young doctor would be put in her place. Well, Maya began carefully, I was looking at his enzyme patterns. I noticed some inconsistencies with the working diagnosis of unstable angina. His troponin trajectory and the timing of his symptoms suggest we might be dealing with something more complex than typical coronary artery disease. Dr. Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly, such as... Maya felt the weight of everyone's attention as she continued. Given his travel history to Southeast Asia last month and the specific pattern of his cardiac markers, I'm wondering if we should consider the possibility of a parasitic infection affecting the myocardium, specifically Chagas disease, which can present with cardiac manifestations that mimic coronary syndromes. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Mitchell let out a barely audible scoff. While one of the nurses shifted uncomfortably, Dr. Thornton's expression hardened, and Maya could see the displeasure in his eyes. Dr. Patel, Dr. Thornton said with barely contained irritation, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we deal in evidence-based medicine here. It's not exotic zebra diagnoses pulled from textbooks. Mr. Chen has a straightforward case of unstable angina, and we'll treat him accordingly. Perhaps you should focus on learning the basics before attempting to impress us with rare diseases you've read about. The rebuke hit Maya like a physical blow. She felt her face burning with embarrassment as snickers rippled through the group. Dr. Mitchell shook his head with obvious disdain, while the nurses exchanged glances that suggested they weren't surprised by the young doctor's overreach. Of course, Dr. Thornton, Maya managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. I apologize for the interruption. As the rounds continued, Maya retreated into herself, mechanically following the group from room to room while her mind raced. With frustration and self-doubt, she had been so certain about her assessment of Mr. Chen's case, but Dr. Thornton's dismissal made her question her own judgment. Maybe she was being too aggressive, too eager to prove herself by finding complex diagnoses where simple ones would suffice. But even as she tried to convince herself that Dr. Thornton was right, Something nagged at her about Mr. Chen's case. The pieces didn't fit together the way they should, and her instincts told her that missing the correct diagnosis could have serious consequences for the patient's health. After rounds concluded, Maya found herself assigned to routine tasks, updating patient charts, following up on lab results, and assisting with minor procedures. It was busy work, the kind of assignments given to residents who needed to learn their place rather than contribute meaningfully to patient care. She threw herself into the tasks with determined professionalism, but her mind kept drifting back to Mr. Chen. During her lunch break, Maya retreated to the hospital library, a quiet sanctuary filled with medical texts and journals. She pulled up everything she could find about Chagas disease and its cardiac manifestations. Cross-referencing the literature with Mr. Chen's symptoms and test results, the more she read, the more convinced she became that her initial assessment had been correct. Chagas disease, caused by the parasite Trypanosoma cruzi, was endemic in parts of Central and South America, but cases had been increasingly reported in travelers returning from affected regions. The cardiac form of the disease could present decades after initial infection. It's often mimicking coronary artery disease or heart failure. The specific pattern of Mr. Chen's cardiac enzymes, combined with his travel history, fit the profile perfectly. Maya knew she should let it go. Dr. Thornton had made his position clear. Challenging a senior attending physician again would only reinforce her reputation as an overconfident resident who didn't know her place. But as she sat surrounded by medical journals, she couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Chen's life might depend on getting the diagnosis right. The afternoon brought a steady stream of patients and procedures, keeping Maya busy with the routine work of hospital medicine. She assisted with echocardiograms, reviewed lab results, and updated treatment plans under the watchful supervision of the nursing staff. Patricia Williams, the charge nurse, seemed to take particular pleasure in giving Maya the most tedious assignments, as if reinforcing the hierarchy through menial tasks. Dr. Patel, Patricia, called out from the nurses' station. Room 15 needs their IV changed, and the patient in 18 is asking for pain medication. Make sure you document everything properly. Amia nodded and hurried to complete the tasks, aware that any delay or mistake would be noted and reported back to Dr. Thornton. The constant scrutiny was exhausting, but she had learned to navigate it with quiet determination and meticulous attention to detail. As the day progressed, Maya found opportunities to check on Mr. Chen discreetly. His condition appeared stable on the surface, but she noticed subtle changes that concerned her. His heart rhythm showed occasional irregularities that weren't being addressed, and his energy levels seemed to be declining rather than improving with the standard treatment protocol. When Maya attempted to bring these observations to Dr. Mitchell's attention, the chief resident brushed her off with barely concealed annoyance. Dr. Patel, Mr. Chen is responding appropriately to treatment. Not every patient improves at the same rate, and not every minor variation requires intervention. Perhaps you should focus on your assigned patients rather than micromanaging cases that are already being handled by more experienced physicians. The dismissal stung, but Maya had expected it. The hierarchy of hospital medicine was rigid and unforgiving, especially for young doctors who dared to question the judgment of their seniors. She returned to her routine tasks, but her concern for Mr. Chen continued to grow. As evening approached, Maya was preparing to hand off her patients to the night shift when alarms began sounding from Mr. Chen's room. She rushed toward the sound, along with several nurses and Dr. Mitchell, who was still on duty. Inside the room, they found Mr. Chen experiencing what appeared to be a cardiac arrhythmia, his heart monitor showing dangerous irregularities. Dr. Mitchell immediately began issuing orders for medications and interventions designed to treat the arrhythmia as a complication of his presumed coronary artery disease. Maya watched from the corner of the room, her heart racing as she realized that Mr. Chen's deterioration was following exactly the pattern she would expect if her diagnosis of Chagas disease was correct. The standard treatments for coronary artery disease wouldn't address the underlying parasitic infection, and in fact, some of the medications being administered could potentially worsen the cardiac manifestations of Chagas disease. Maya felt a desperate urge to speak up, but she knew that interrupting during a medical emergency would be seen as unforgivable. Insubordination. As the code team worked to stabilize Mr. Chen, Maya stepped back into the hallway, her mind racing, with the terrible possibility that her silence might cost a patient his life. She pulled out her phone and quickly researched the contact information for the hospital's infectious disease department, wondering if she could somehow get them involved without directly challenging Dr. Mitchell's authority. Before she could act on the impulse, Dr. Thornton arrived on the scene, having been called by the nursing staff. He quickly assessed the situation and endorsed Dr. Mitchell's treatment approach, praising the chief resident for his quick thinking and appropriate interventions. Maya felt her heart sink as the opportunity to voice her concerns seemed to slip away. The code team managed to stabilize Mr. Chen's rhythm temporarily, but Maya could see that his overall condition was continuing to deteriorate. The treatments. They were providing might by time, but they weren't addressing what she believed to be the root cause of his cardiac problems. She watched helplessly as the medical team congratulated themselves on their quick response, while potentially missing the diagnosis that could save their patient's life. As the immediate crisis passed, Dr. Thornton approached Maya with an expression of stern disapproval. "Dr. Patel, I notice you standing back during the code. In the future, I expect you to be more engaged when your patients are in distress. This is not the time for passive observation." Maya felt the injustice of the criticism like a physical blow. She had been excluded from meaningful participation by the very hierarchy that was now criticizing her for not being involved enough. "Yes, sir," she managed to say, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Dr. Thornton continued, his voice carrying the weight of professional authority. "Furthermore, I've been hearing reports that you've been questioning established diagnoses and treatment plans. Let me be clear. You are here to learn, not to second-guess the clinical judgment of physicians with decades of experience. I suggest you focus on observing and learning rather than trying to reinvent medical practice." The words hit Maya like a series of hammer blows. She felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she forced herself to maintain composure in front of her colleagues. "I understand, Dr. Thornton. I'll be more mindful going forward." As Dr. Thornton walked away, Maya found herself alone in the hallway, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the hospital, but feeling more isolated than ever. She had entered medicine to help people, to use her intellect and training to make a difference in patients' lives. Instead, she felt trapped in a system that valued hierarchy and conformity over critical thinking and patient advocacy. But even as she struggled with feelings of defeat and frustration, Maya's mind continued to work on Mr. Chen's case. She couldn't shake the conviction that her diagnosis was correct, and she couldn't ignore the possibility that her silence might have fatal consequences. The ethical weight of the situation pressed down on her as she considered her limited options. Maya spent a sleepless night wrestling with her conscience and reviewing medical literature on her laptop. She read case studies of Chagas disease, familiarized herself with the latest diagnostic criteria, and analyzed every detail of Mr. Chen's presentation. By morning, she was more convinced than ever that her assessment was correct. But she also realized that her previous attempts to raise concerns had only damaged her credibility further. The next day brought news that Mr. Chen had experienced another cardiac event during the night shift. This time, the arrhythmia had been more severe, requiring more aggressive interventions to stabilize his condition. Maya arrived at the hospital to find the cardiac unit buzzing with activity as the medical team prepared for what might be a lengthy battle to keep their patient alive. Dr. Thornton was already on the unit, reviewing Mr. Chen's overnight records with a furrowed brow. The confidence he had displayed the previous day seemed somewhat shaken by the patient's unexpected deterioration. Maya watched from a distance as he consulted with cardiology specialists and reviewed treatment options, his usual authoritative demeanor replaced by visible concern. During morning rounds, the discussion of Mr. Chen's case took on a more urgent tone. Dr. Thornton acknowledged that the patient wasn't responding to treatment as expected and suggested bringing in additional specialists for consultation. Maya listened carefully, hoping that someone might raise the possibility of an infectious etiology, but the conversation remained focused on conventional cardiac causes. When the discussion moved to other patients, Maya felt a desperate need to act. She couldn't continue to stand by while Mr. Chen's condition worsened, especially when she believed she knew what was wrong. But she also knew that another direct challenge to Dr. Thornton's authority would likely end her residency and destroy her medical career before it had truly begun. Instead, Maya decided to take a different approach. During her lunch break, she made her way to the hospital's administrative offices, looking for someone who might listen to her concerns without the bias of the medical hierarchy. She had heard about patient advocates and quality improvement programs, and she hoped that one of these channels might provide a way to voice her concerns without directly confronting her supervising physicians. The administrative corridors of St. Catherine's were a stark contrast to the clinical areas. Carpeted floors, replaced linoleum, and the walls were decorated with artistic photographs rather than medical equipment. Maya felt out of place in her white coat as she navigated the unfamiliar territory. Looking for the right office, she finally found the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Department, housed in a suite of offices near the hospital's executive offices. Maya knocked on the door marked Director and was invited in by a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Dr. Patel, isn't it?" the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of Patient Safety."
Okay.
"I help you?" Maya was surprised to be recognized. But she quickly realized that her reputation as a challenging resident had probably spread beyond the clinical departments. She took a deep breath and began to explain her concerns about Mr. Chen's case, carefully presenting the medical evidence without directly criticizing her supervising physicians. Dr. Chen listened intently, taking notes and asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her own medical background. When Maya finished her presentation, the director leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. "These are serious concerns, Dr. Patel," Dr. Chen said carefully. "You're suggesting that a patient may be receiving inappropriate treatment based on a misdiagnosis? That's exactly the kind of issue our department is designed to address." Maya felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. "I know I'm just a resident, and I understand that my concerns have been dismissed by more senior physicians. But I genuinely believe that Mr. Chen's life may be at risk if we don't consider alternative diagnoses." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Your position in the medical hierarchy is irrelevant when it comes to patient safety. Good medicine requires input from all levels of healthcare providers, and some of the most important insights come from fresh perspectives. Let me make some inquiries and see what we can do." As Maya left the patient safety office, she felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She had finally found someone willing to listen to her concerns, but she also knew that her actions might have serious consequences for her relationship with Dr. Thornton and the cardiac unit. The decision to go outside the normal chain of command could be seen as insubordination, potentially ending her residency at St. Catherine's. But as she returned to the cardiac unit and saw Mr. Chen's family gathered anxiously in the waiting room, Maya knew she had made the right choice. Their worried faces reminded her why she had entered medicine in the first place: to help patients and their families during their most vulnerable moments. The afternoon passed quietly, with Maya focusing on her routine assignments while trying not to think about the potential consequences of her morning meeting. She checked on Mr. Chen whenever possible, noting that his condition remained precarious despite the intensive interventions being provided by the medical team. As evening approached, Maya was surprised to receive a message asking her to report to Dr. Chen's office immediately. Her heart pounded as she made her way back to the administrative wing, uncertain about what she might find. Had her concerns been taken seriously, or was she about to face disciplinary action for going outside the proper channels? When she entered the patient safety office, Maya was startled to find Dr. Thornton sitting across from Dr. Chen's desk, his expression unreadable. Also present was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the hospital's chief medical officer, a woman whose reputation for clinical excellence was matched only by her no-nonsense approach to medical administration. "Dr. Patel," Dr. Morrison said, her voice neutral but commanding attention. "Please have a seat. We need to discuss your concerns about Mr. Chen's case." Maya sat down carefully, acutely aware of the tension in the room. Dr. Thornton's jaw was tight, and she could see that he was struggling to contain his anger at what he undoubtedly saw as a betrayal of medical hierarchy and protocol. Dr. Chen spoke first, her voice professional but supportive. Dr. Patel has raised some important questions about Mr. Chen's diagnosis and treatment. Given the patient's continued deterioration despite appropriate therapy, I felt it was important to review her concerns with senior medical staff. Dr. Morrison nodded and turned to Maya. Dr. Patel, I'd like you to present your case directly to Dr. Thornton and myself. Please explain your diagnostic reasoning and why you believe the current treatment approach may be inadequate. Maya took a deep breath, knowing that this might be her only opportunity to make her case effectively. She began by systematically reviewing Mr. Chen's presentation, travel history, and laboratory findings, building a careful argument for why Chagas disease should be considered as a differential diagnosis. As she spoke, Maya could see Dr. Thornton's expression gradually changing from anger to thoughtful consideration. Her presentation was methodical and evidence-based, drawing on current medical literature and case studies to support her conclusions. She acknowledged the rarity of the diagnosis while emphasizing the potentially fatal consequences of missing it. When Maya finished her presentation, the room fell silent. Dr. Morrison exchanged a meaningful glance with Dr. Chen before turning back to Maya with an expression of serious consideration. Dr. Patel, Dr. Morrison said slowly, your analysis is remarkably thorough for a resident. These are exactly the kind of diagnostic considerations that we hope to see from our physicians at all levels. Dr. Thornton, what are your thoughts on pursuing this line of investigation? Dr. Thornton shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling with the implications of Maya's presentation. I acknowledge that Dr. Patel has raised some valid points. Perhaps we should consider additional testing to rule out infectious etiologies. Maya felt a surge of vindication, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned enough about medical politics to know that this moment required humility rather than triumph. Dr. Morrison stood up, signaling that the meeting was coming to a conclusion. Dr. Thornton, I'd like you to order the appropriate tests for Chagas disease immediately. Dr. Patel, you'll work directly with the infectious disease team to coordinate Mr. Chen's evaluation. This case will be closely monitored by patient safety to ensure that all diagnostic possibilities are thoroughly explored. As they left the office, Dr. Thornton walked beside Maya in silence, his earlier anger replaced by what appeared to be grudging respect. Finally, he spoke in a voice that was quieter than his usual commanding tone. Dr. Patel, he said, I owe you an apology. I let my assumptions about your experience cloud my judgment about your clinical reasoning. That was inappropriate and potentially dangerous for our patient. Maya was stunned by the admission. Throughout her medical training, she had rarely heard senior physicians acknowledge mistakes or apologize to residents. Thank you, Dr. Thornton. I hope we can work together to help Mr. Chen. Dr. Thornton nodded slowly. Indeed, and Dr. Patel. In the future, please don't hesitate to voice your concerns directly to me. Your insights today may have saved a patient's life, and that's more important than any hierarchy or protocol. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Mr. Chen underwent specialized testing for Chagas disease. Maya worked closely with Dr. Jennifer Rodriguez from the Infectious Disease Department, a brilliant physician who immediately grasped the significance of Maya's diagnostic reasoning. This is excellent clinical thinking, Dr. Rodriguez told Maya as they reviewed the test results. The serology is positive for trypanosoma cruzi, and the cardiac biopsy shows the characteristic inflammatory changes. You were absolutely right about this diagnosis. The confirmation of Chagas disease meant that Mr. Chen could finally receive appropriate treatment. The antiparasitic medications and cardiac-specific therapies for Chagas cardiomyopathy were very different from the treatments he had been receiving for presumed coronary artery disease. Within days of starting the correct treatment, his condition began to stabilize and gradually improve. Maya found herself at the center of a hospital-wide discussion about diagnostic reasoning and the importance of considering alternative diagnoses, especially in an increasingly diverse patient population. Her case became a teaching example used in medical conferences and residency training programs. But perhaps most importantly for Maya, the dynamics on the cardiac unit began to change. Dr. Thornton made a point of asking for her input during rounds, as the nursing staff started treating her with the respect accorded to a valued member of the medical team. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete, but it represented a significant shift in how her colleagues viewed her capabilities. Patricia Williams, the charge nurse who had been particularly dismissive of Maya, approached her one afternoon with an unusual request. "Dr. Patel," she said, her tone notably warmer than usual, "I wanted to thank you for what you did for Mr. Chen. I've been a nurse for over 20 years. I've seen too many cases where the right diagnosis was missed because someone was afraid. To speak up, you showed real courage." Maya was touched by the acknowledgement from someone she had come to respect, despite their difficult interactions. "Thank you, Patricia. I just did what I thought was right for the patient." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what good medicine should be about. I hope I haven't made your job too difficult with my ... old-fashioned approach to hospital hierarchy." Maya appreciated the indirect apology, understanding that Patricia's behavior had been shaped by decades of working in a system that often discouraged input from junior staff members. "We all want what's best for our patients," Maya replied diplomatically. As the weeks passed, Maya found that her reputation within the hospital had fundamentally changed. She was no longer seen as an overconfident resident who needed to be put in her place, but rather as a promising young physician with exceptional diagnostic skills. The transformation was both gratifying and somewhat overwhelming. As she adjusted to being taken seriously by colleagues who had previously dismissed her, Mr. Chen's recovery became a source of pride, not just for Maya but for the entire cardiac unit. His case was presented at regional medical conferences as an example of the importance of considering infectious diseases in cardiac presentations, with Maya often invited to discuss her diagnostic reasoning. During one such presentation, Dr. Morrison introduced Maya to the audience with words that would stay with her throughout her career. Dr. Patel's case reminds us that good medicine has nothing to do with age or position in the hierarchy, and everything to do with careful observation, critical thinking, and the courage to advocate for our patients. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Mr. Chen was finally discharged from the hospital. His cardiac function significantly improved, and his long-term prognosis much more optimistic than it had been under his original diagnosis. He and his family asked specifically to thank Maya for her persistence in pursuing the correct diagnosis. "Dr. Patel," Mr. Chen said, his voice emotional, "my family and I will never forget what you did for us. You saved my life by refusing to give up, even when others didn't believe you." Maya felt tears welling in her eyes as she accepted their gratitude. This was why she had entered medicine, to make a real difference in people's lives, to use her knowledge and skills to help patients and families during their most challenging times. As Maya walked through the corridors of St. Catherine's that evening, she reflected on how much had changed since the morning she had first voiced her concerns about Mr. Chen's case. The young doctor who had been dismissed and marginalized had proven that expertise and insight could come from unexpected sources, that the courage to speak up for patients was more important than maintaining comfortable hierarchies. But Maya also knew that her story was far from unique. Throughout hospitals and medical centers around the world, young physicians, nurses, and other healthcare providers regularly identified important clinical insights that were dismissed because of their position in the medical hierarchy. Her experience had taught her that changing these dynamics required not just individual courage, but institutional commitment to valuing good ideas regardless of their source. In the months that followed, Maya became an advocate for creating more inclusive medical environments where junior staff members felt empowered to voice their observations and concerns. She worked with Dr. Chen's patient safety department to develop protocols that encouraged input from all levels of healthcare providers, regardless of their experience or position. The changes at St. Catherine's were gradual but meaningful. Regular interdisciplinary conferences were established where residents, nurses, and medical students could present cases and diagnostic insights. Formal mentorship programs were created to help senior physicians recognize and nurture the talents of their junior colleagues. Most importantly, A culture began to emerge that valued clinical reasoning and patient advocacy over rigid adherence to hierarchy. Maya's own career trajectory reflected these broader changes. She completed her residency with distinction and was offered a fellowship position in infectious diseases, working directly with Dr. Rodriguez to further develop her expertise in tropical and emerging infectious diseases. Her research on Chagas disease in returning travelers was published in several prestigious medical journals, establishing her as a rising expert in the field. But even as she advanced in her career, Maya never forgot the lessons of Mr. Chun's case. She made it a priority to listen to input from medical students, residents, and nursing staff. Knowing that fresh perspectives often led to important clinical insights, she also became a mentor to young physicians who struggled with similar challenges related to their age or appearance. Years later, when Maya had become an attending physician herself, she would often tell the story of Mr. Chen to her own trainees. She would emphasize that good medicine required not just knowledge and technical skills, but also the courage to advocate for patients even when it meant challenging established authority. The eighth story Maya would tell her students is often the one that reveals the most important truth. Don't let anyone convince you that your youth or inexperience disqualifies your observations. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who sees most clearly. Dr. Thornton, for his part, underwent his own transformation following the Mr. Chen case. He became known throughout the hospital for his willingness to listen to input from residents and students, and he often spoke about the importance of maintaining intellectual humility, regardless of one's experience level. Maya Patel taught me that wisdom has nothing to do with age, he would say in his lectures to medical students. She reminded me that our primary obligation is to our patients, not to our egos or our position in the medical hierarchy. The case also had broader implications for St. Catherine's Medical Center as an institution. The hospital's administration recognized that Maya's diagnostic insight had not only saved a patient's life, but it also prevented a potential malpractice lawsuit and protected the hospital's reputation. They began to see inclusive medical practice not just as an ethical imperative, but as a practical necessity for providing the highest quality care. As Maya progressed in her career, she remained grateful for the support she had received from Dr. Chen's patient safety department and Dr. Morrison's leadership. Their willingness to listen to a young resident's concerns had created the opportunity for Mr. Chen to receive appropriate treatment. But it had also sent a powerful message throughout the hospital about the value of every healthcare provider's input. The story of the young doctor, who was initially dismissed but ultimately proved right, became part of St. Catherine's institutional culture. New residents and medical students would hear about Maya's case during their orientation, learning that the hospital valued clinical excellence and patient advocacy over hierarchy and tradition. Maya's experience also influenced medical education. More broadly, the case was included in textbooks and training curricula as an example of the importance of considering diverse perspectives in medical decision-making. Medical schools began to emphasize not just clinical knowledge, but also the communication skills and institutional navigation required to advocate effectively for patients. Years after Mr. Chen's case, Maya received a letter from a medical student who had heard her story during a lecture on medical ethics and patient advocacy. The student wrote about how Maya's example had inspired her to speak up when she noticed a potential medication error during her clinical rotation, ultimately preventing harm to a patient. "Your story taught me that being young doesn't mean being wrong," the student wrote. "It taught me that our first responsibility is always to our patients, regardless of what others might think about our qualifications to speak up." Reading that letter, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond her own career achievements. She had not only helped one patient receive appropriate care, but had also contributed to a broader aesthetic cultural shift that would benefit countless patients and healthcare providers in the years to come. The eighth story of Mr. Chun's case revealed that expertise and insight could emerge from unexpected sources, that youth was not a disqualification for clinical excellence, and that the courage to advocate for patients was the most important quality any physician could possess. Maya's journey from dismissed resident to respected attending physician became a testament to the power of perseverance. the importance of institutional support for inclusive medicine, and the fundamental principle that good patient care required. Input from all members of the healthcare team as Maya continued her career in infectious diseases. She carried with her the lessons learned during those challenging days on the cardiac unit. She remained committed to fostering environments where every healthcare provider felt empowered to contribute their observations and insights, knowing that the next crucial diagnosis might come from the person everyone least expected to have. The answer, the story of Dr. Maya Patel and Mr. Chen's case, became more than just a medical success story. It became a reminder that in medicine, as in life, the eighth story often reveals the most important truths, and that the most qualified voice in the room might belong to the person everyone assumes has the least to offer. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of perseverance, courage, and the power of speaking truth to authority. We've witnessed how a young doctor's determination to do right by her patient overcame institutional barriers and hierarchical dismissal. To save a life and transform an entire medical culture, Dr. Maya Patel's story reminds us that expertise isn't measured by years of experience alone, but by the quality of observation, the courage of conviction, and the willingness to put patients first, regardless of personal consequences. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who sees most clearly. And sometimes the eighth story reveals that wisdom has no age limit. Her case shows us that real change happens when institutions create space for every voice to be heard. When senior leaders have the humility to acknowledge their mistakes, and when young professionals have the courage to stand up for what they believe is right, even when the entire system seems arrayed against them. If this story moved you, take a moment to consider the young professionals in your own life. The interns, the recent graduates, the newest team members who might have insights that could change everything if someone would just listen. How often do we dismiss valuable perspectives simply because they come from unexpected sources? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that challenge assumptions and celebrate the power of speaking up for what's right, regardless of age, experience, or position in the hierarchy. Because sometimes, the eighth story reveals that the most important breakthrough comes from the person everyone thought was too young to know anything. And sometimes the greatest wisdom emerges from those who refuse to be silenced by systems that prioritize status over substance. Remember, in medicine, business, and life itself, the next game-changing insight might come from the person sitting quietly in the corner, the one everyone assumes is still learning. The question is not whether they have something valuable to contribute. The question is whether we have the wisdom to listen.